Now, the opportunity is if we're able to make it through during that time, I think that we're going to be able to position ourselves super well when there's a rebound, because there's always going to be a rebound.
Welcome to the Road to CEO, the podcast where we go deep with CEOs about their journey in business. I'm here today with my man, Rob Chevez, who I've known for years, who's been a friend of mine and a mentor in business. This is a great guest for the Road to CEO podcast because he knows everything about business, management, investment, innovation, leadership. Let's get into it. Rob, welcome to the show.
Will, thank you, man. Now I've got a lot to live up to with that intro.
Yeah, I know. Well, no, I didn't want to take it easy on you.
Cool.
Because in all seriousness, you do know a lot about business. You have been, you've been in business for a long time. You have advised me on things. And so I'm really looking forward to talking to you about this. How long have you been in business? Like, how long have you been a CEO?
See, I've been as an entrepreneur, self-employed, pretty much right out of college, right? So it's been 20 some odd years, 22 years, something like that, 21, who's counting, right?
Yeah, who's counting?
And as a CEO of this business, it's been since 2005, right? So I started, in the recruiting business with somebody that, a good friend of mine, Brock. And, in this business in 2005, I was like, hey, I need to really build a real estate business. It's like my calling, right? Something in me says that this is the direction I need to take my life. So, but I've never relied on anybody else for a paycheck, except for a brief time, like while I was in college, and then while I maybe 6 months, 8 months out of college, but I was mentoring under an entrepreneur, a business owner that whole time. And I loved him. And I essentially said, the only reason why I'm leaving is because I want to go build my own thing. And he said, okay, I understand. I felt super guilty about it because I love the guy. And
so let's pause for a second and let's go back a moment. So what business were you involved with that guy where you felt guilty about leaving? What was the nature of his business?
He was in the insurance business.
Okay.
Right? So, the way I would describe him is he's the Dan Gable of insurance. Like he's the Dan Gable of insurance, just meaning he's the best of the best of the best of the best. Right. And I worked for him while I was in college. He wrestled, right, for American University. He was an alum. That's how I met him. He gave me a shot when I was in college to essentially work in his accounting department, not because I was great at accounting, but because my accounting professor recommended that I go work for this entrepreneur who she said would, I reminded her a little bit of him. Maybe it's because we're both short. I don't know. And she said, hey, you should go work for him. I'm like, I'm not doing great in your class. She said, that's not the point. You've got something and he has something, and I think you need to meet him. And so it just happened that I already knew him because he was an alum for AU. And so it was easy. So I went to go work for him while I was in college. And then I got to see what his world looked like. And that hooked me, right?
And did you see that? And did you see that kind of as an apprenticeship to an entrepreneur?
100%. Right. Yeah. The way I looked at it. And in fact, I'll even go back even further. There was another gentleman on my team who his dad owned a bunch of commercial real estate. He owned a restaurant. He owned a beauty shop. Like, he owned a bunch of different little businesses. And I asked my friend over the summer whether or not I could intern for his dad for free. Right. And his dad lived like 2 hours away, or like an hour and a half away in Frederick, Maryland. But I was hungry to learn from business people. And remember, I was a psych major. I just had seen what business was capable of doing while I was in college, because I started getting surrounded by these people that owned things and built things. And I love the idea of owning things and building things. And so I was just hungry to learn from other entrepreneurs. So my first apprenticeship was to go work for this other gentleman for free, completely for free. I did it for a summer. And then the next year I worked for Alan. He paid me, right? And then I worked for him while I was, a little bit out of college, and I really got the bug from him. I saw how he treated people, how he cared, how he built the business. I learned so much from him by just watching, and then I wanted to do that. I wanted to, replicate what he had done. Hard to replicate what he's built. He's amazing, right? Amazing. But I'm working at it. So
yeah, you are working at it. And so why don't you describe your business right now? So and maybe the one you started 2005, I think.
So the business that I started in 2005 was a real estate investment business. That was purely, I was just going to buy investments to create positive cash flow, because I'd been in this other business before, 7 years prior, where every month we started at zero. And I didn't like the idea of starting at zero every single month. I wanted to build something that had recurring revenue to it. And along the way, I'd been buying real estate and really caught the real estate bug. So by 2005, I knew that we were probably going to go through some kind of real estate recession, only because it felt like irrational exuberance, which is what I'd gone through in the year 2000 in the tech boom. So it felt the same way. It's not because I understood how to read the tea leaves. I saw people making decisions based purely on emotion, right? And I said, okay. I turned to my wife, Kim, and I said, babe, real estate is calling to me. I want to build something for our family that creates recurring revenue. I believe in that. The issue is, I think that we're going to go into some kind of correction in real estate. Now, the opportunity is, if we're able to make it through during that time, I think that we're going to be able to position ourselves super well when there's a rebound, because there's always going to be a rebound. And so that's what happened. So we got in, we started buying a lot of investments 2 hours away from where we lived, because the numbers just didn't make sense where we were. We avoided the whole crash, that occurred for a lot of people, because we were in a submarket that had really not gone through the same kind of peaks and valleys. And I was buying small cash flow property, really learning the game. And then by 2008, when I looked up here in Northern Virginia, everything was on sale, right? Every house was a foreclosure or a short sale. And I started buying with a friend of mine that had a lot of cash. And it was my first partnership that I'd really developed. We bought some properties earlier, some student rentals in like 2006, 2007 together, and those worked well. So when I approached him about these other properties that had peaked at $350 and now you could buy for $120, and the rents were $1,500 a month, and the rent to purchase ratio was amazing. We just hadn't seen it in a long time. I just happened to mention the idea, and he said, I will fund you if you find them and you fix them and you manage the project and you manage the asset over the long term. And so that's what I did. And it was really a blessing, right? Because, I met somebody that was willing to take a chance and do that. And it helped us build wealth in our life. And so very thankful for my buddy, Rich, who was part of that process, right?
Yeah, that's really exciting. And it's interesting to me because I think you and I both founded companies and became CEO of companies that we founded. And I often think, and I remember thinking this early on, that the best thing I did was picking the right horse. I picked, digital marketing for me. And within digital marketing, it was Google that I focused on. And, the growth in those areas is so much. And then, everything that happens along the way, it's like more money gets pushed into the digital space, more responsibility, more expansion opportunities for somebody that's specialized in those areas. And I feel like it sounds like for you picked something you're passionate in with real estate, but you also picked something where you were kind of reading the tea leaves a little bit. I know you said you weren't reading the tea leaves, but you did think there was a correction coming. And so you saw like some type of an opportunity. Is that so? Is that accurate to say that you really, thought hard about that? Like, you're going to build something. Where are you going to build it?
100%. I just started asking myself the question, what happened was I had house hacked a house, right? That's what they call it, right? House hacked a house when I was like 25,
What
24.
does that mean?
So what that means is that I bought my first house, but I
Yeah.
moved people in. I moved in tenants. So essentially they were paying the majority of my mortgage. And I was 24, 25. And that's when it hit me. That was like the lightning
I
strike.
see.
And I said, wow, I control this piece of property. They're paying my note down.
Mhm.
I'm building equity and they're paying off the debt. I was like, this concept have just made a lot of sense to me. And then I started exploring more and reading more and reading more. And I fell in love with that concept. Right. And I was hungry for it because I love the idea, the concept if you do something today and you do it well, that you can get paid for it forever. Right.
Mhm.
And I know that things always get disrupted, right? Technology can get disrupted. You could build a company today, it's doing well today, and then boom, another technology can come in and disrupt it. It just can, right? But there were certain things, and part of this, by the way, during the dot-com boom, there was a lot of companies that got a lot of money that I invested the little dollars that I had, and I wasn't being guided by anybody, and those businesses went to zero. I didn't even know that was possible. I was like, businesses go to zero, right? And so I learned a lesson. I said, okay, I want to buy something where nobody could take it away from me unless it's my fault, right?
Yeah.
And real estate seemed like a very tangible thing that, hey, nobody could take it away from me. If I own it, if I control it,
That's
nobody
interesting.
could take it away, right? Because I had money taken away and it just went away. It just evaporated. I was like, that's possible, right? How is that possible? Of course, I was young and foolish and all the rest. And I knew better, right? Like I understood about investing in the S&P and things like that. But I'd put a good chunk of money into individual stocks and
Yeah.
lesson learned. So it's funny how those things influence you later in life. Like people that went through the Great Depression were
Yeah.
influenced massively, right, to turn off the lights and save their money, and you just don't know. And so that crash influenced me. I'm like, I want something that I can touch, I can control it,
Interesting.
right? And yeah, nobody can take it away.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I went through something of a similar experience where I started a software company, and I'm not a software developer, and so I raised capital, but and a lot of that capital was spent on hiring software developers. And the business was an okay business. It was eventually acquired, but I didn't like that feeling of building a business that I didn't control, that I couldn't, not just that I didn't control, but that I couldn't contribute enough to the core value proposition for. And so, and then kind of came my wrestling influence, as a former wrestler, I wanted something where hard work really paid off financially and paid off in a business sense. And so after that first business for me, I wanted to create a business where if I got into trouble and it was a challenging time, like for instance, right after COVID in March 11th or so of last year, when the WHO declared the pandemic, I lost a large number of accounts, had to go on pause in a situation that was completely unforeseeable from an ad agency CEO perspective. But hard work could deal with that. You could say, okay, well, I'm going to work twice as hard. I'm going to be twice as smart. I'm going to take the lessons learned and really come out of that stronger, which is what happened. But it's interesting because you're right. You go through these experiences and you learn from them, and they really do affect you.
Yeah, that you start. What's my blind spot? It was
Yeah.
interesting. I was I'm on the board of directors for a national organization that has like 50,000 members in it, and we were doing a SWOT analysis in early February, maybe late January. And on that threats part, we didn't put down pandemic, right? And the majority of their revenue came from advertising dollars.
Yeah.
And, but it was really cool to see people that take action, that don't like crawl under a rock. they took action, they cut budgets, they thought strategically, they talked to their stakeholders. I equate it to somebody, in wrestling, just coming after you, like they're being aggressive, and you've got to step forward and be aggressive too, and be strategic, and and attack as well. And good entrepreneurs don't hide. They find solutions to problems, and they don't delay. They do it straight away. I mean, when the pandemic hit, like we were all action, because that's all you can do, right? Yeah. Well, I guess the opposite is you wait and sit, and you're going to get hit by a bus if you just kind of wait and sit. And we're not wired that way.
We're not wired that way. And I will say, not to be mean to other CEOs, but I do know that there are CEOs that took that route and started making changes 4 months into the pandemic, and they wanted to kind of hold off. And, some people couldn't help it because maybe they're a part of a franchise, and so they don't have certain control over all aspects of their strategy. But other businesses, I know, people wanted to just kind of hold off and see what happened. And, I think what that, during the COVID situation, mostly that was negative, because it was something where maybe they took a gamble that it was going to be all over in 2 months or 3 months. And really we're past the 12-month mark now. Yeah. So it just kind of put them behind. So I think that wrestler approach would have paid off for almost all of them.
Now, I will say we were lucky. We're in real estate. Real estate didn't actually benefited from it. But your industry, there was a major pivot, right? Everybody kind of shut a lot of their spending down. I mean, I remember. So it must have been a scary, challenging time, and it's a testament to say, like, okay, how are we going to fix this? What are we going to do, right? I think that's the kind of the lesson there, is that in every business, you're going to get punched in the face, and you're going to have to figure out, how am I going to change my tactic? What am I going to do? How am I going to do this? Right? Hopefully what happens is you don't get knocked out, that you've been smart, that you have enough cash reserves, right? That you can move quickly enough, that you can be creative enough to think of other ways to create revenue. Like, I started watching people in the news that were creatively, they were a manufacturer of Frisbees, and the next thing you know, they're creating PPP face masks. I'm like, brilliant, right? Like, that's somebody late at night saying, how can I take what I have and take this lemon that I've been given and make it into lemonade? And that's the power of ingenuity. That's the power of creativity. And that's the power of a good CEO that's going to shift when something happens. Right.
Well, so just to talk about that for a second, I remember right when COVID hit, I thought to myself, I really, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, I don't want to talk about how I went out of business because of COVID. I want to talk about how I overcame that, made it through, survived, came out stronger on the other end as a business. I want to take care of my team. I want to do certain things. And I actually do think that, and there aren't that many moments like this as an entrepreneur and a CEO where, there are a lot of tiny moments that I think we can be proud of and that we are proud of. And then there are some really big moments. And I actually think that this is probably one of the things I'm most proud of, is that my company took a big hit early on. And it was actually only because about 30% of our clients had to pause. Like, they simply were shut down by the government. And then other clients, for the most part, stayed the course. Like, they didn't, they kept their advertising. They wanted to keep investing in their growth, and try to mitigate the impacts of COVID as much as they could. But for me, the ones that paused, it was a substantial amount of clients that had to pause. You couldn't blame them, and I wanted to help them as much as possible. But the thing I'm most proud of is taking care of the team and actually recovering from a revenue perspective before the 12 months was over. So essentially, we were able to grow through the pandemic. In many ways, it had to have been the most challenging thing for me. And and it's interesting because we're still in COVID. I mean, it's not, it's hard to say you're proud of it frankly, because it's like, it feels like you're popping champagne way too early.
Well, at least there's a known. I think part of it is we now understand
Yeah.
what we're in. We didn't
Correct.
know what we were in before. So there's a lot of fear with the unknown. Like,
That's right.
how bad is this going to be? What is it going to look like?
Yeah.
And so we can create a lot of fear in our own mind.
I agree with that. I agree. And yes, it is, we're still in it. There's still unknowns, but you're right. Compared to the unknowns of March 11th, 2020, it's a totally different world we're in. And
Sure.
we see a lot of things. We've got the vaccines, we've got people taking them, all of that. So that it segues well into a question I really wanted to ask you, which is, what's something that you're proud of as CEO? Like, do you have something that you think of as, the thing that makes you the proudest of what you've accomplished in, your 100 years as CEO?
I think it's helping our team members build wealth in their life that I can look back now a decade and say, wow, that family has positively been impacted by what we've done and what we've built. And that brings me the most joy when I see people grow professionally, financially. That makes me proud, right? I love that. And it's the journey of this constant never-ending improvement, the cycle of like learning, right? Getting knocked down, learning from that, learning from that negative experience, and then getting back up and learning some more. And it's just that cycle. Ray Dalio talks about that cycle of you're always going to get to another peak. You're going to get knocked down. You're going to learn from getting knocked down. You're going to move to another peak. And so there's this evolution that happens. And that's part of the journey, right? So I enjoy learning and I enjoy growing, and it's a game. And so I'm figuring out how to put the pieces together, the right people together, the right systems together to play the game. That's part of the fun for me. But the thing I'm proud of is watching how it's helped other people move their life forward.
Yeah. So if I had met you and you were looking to hire me back in 2005, when you were just starting with this company, you'd had experience, you'd been, had other roles, but versus if I met you 2021 and you wanted to hire me, how would you be different, do you think?
Well, in 2005, I would not have tested you, right? So now I'm big into understanding like what makes everybody tick, right? So we'll put somebody through what we call the KPA. It's an assessment. It's only a portion of it. I would make you take the 5 love languages to see like what how you receive love. Believe it or not,
is that literally the marriage counseling thing?
It is. There's one for business too, right?
Interesting.
But for me, it's about building teams, right? So I need to understand how you receive love, right? How do you receive recognition? Like, is it quality time? If it is, that's one that I'm not the best at because I'm busy, right?
Yeah.
So I know I need to slow down and provide more quality time and provide more space. Or if it's words of affirmation, then I need to make sure that I'm providing lots of words of affirmation. So I would not have understood that. It would have been more intuition, right?
So you would have. So these are things that you've learned. So, this is really all about knowing your team, I think. Is that? Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, because what happens is if you take an assessment and there's a lot of questions that are asked, I can understand what you value, what causes you stress, what seat potentially you would fit best on. It doesn't mean that you're going to be good or bad at a role, right? But I understand more about what makes you tick.
Yeah.
Then I'm going to look at your grit level for our business. Like, how gritty are you, right?
Yeah.
If you're an agent, I need people that have a high level of grit. If you're in operations, right, I also need somebody, because of our environment, that has this constant, never-ending improvement mindset, right? That we're always going to be improving, that it's never perfect, that it is day one, right? Like, as Jeff Bezos says in Amazon, like, it's like, hey, we're every day we're starting over, right? Because the market is always changing. So the biggest thing is I would spend more time assessing people and understanding whether it's a good fit for them
Yeah.
as opposed to whether or not it's a good fit for me. Right.
Oh, it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's an interesting distinction. I hadn't articulated it quite that way. But I do, along my journey, I started realizing that you need people's goals to be aligned with yours, and if you find that, then you're no longer trying to get them to do something. They're just going to do it because that's what they would be doing anyway.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
It's interesting about the assessments too. So I probably don't do enough of that, but we do the Strength Finders assessment, which I believe is I can't remember the name of the person that put that together, but maybe Buckley or something like that. But that's one where you're looking at not somebody's weaknesses, but you're looking at like what are they really good at, and what
What's
are
their
they
superpower?
yeah, what's their superpower? And again, it's kind of the approach is, we want them to do the things that they would be doing anyway, that come naturally to them. And if it doesn't come naturally to them, then maybe it's a different role that would be more suited. So I feel like I've had kind of a similar evolution. So what other ways do you feel like you were different back when you first started this company that you're with now?
Man, I didn't know anything, right? It's, you hear this a lot with entrepreneurs. Like if I had known how hard it was going to be, right? Or if I knew what I was getting into, I would not have done it. I would have done it anyways. Like
I think you would have done it anyway.
I would have done it anyways, right? But you hear that a lot because many times you just jump in completely naively. And for us, I think the biggest education was understanding all the numbers, right? I just had a gut feeling that this is what I should do and that I was going to be able to figure it out. But we didn't budget for it properly. We didn't plan for it properly. We didn't put anything into a pro forma. I was just like, seems like a good idea. Let's go do it, right? So what I would do today is I would sit down and say, okay, does this make financial sense? What does the pro forma look like? How many clients would I need to get? What does this look like? What would be, what do my expenses need to be? I mean, I was clueless.
I was too. And, but I'll tell you the other thing I wish I had done differently was I would have done certain things much faster. Much faster, and I know you've maybe said something similar to that. I've heard over the years, but for me, I would have hired a little faster. I would have had a little more faith in the growth of the industry. I mean, that's what some of it comes down to, frankly. But even without that, I would have just moved faster because there are certain things, that you kind of tap the brakes on or tap your feet on, and you could just start running.
Yep. Yeah, I think the biggest thing is for me, it's finding a mentor or finding a business owner that's already built what you want to build. Right? If you're not going to go revolutionize something, like Elon Musk is not going to go find somebody to learn from on these things. But my business is a mature business. And so there was plenty of people out there that had already built it. So seeking out those people and saying, okay, how do I cut 5 years, and make it happen in 5 months, right? 6 months. Help me do that. I wish I had done that faster, right? Instead of trying to figure it out and then eventually realize, oh, wow, I could have done this a lot faster if I just talked to the right people, asked the right questions, went out and put myself out there and not be afraid to ask questions of people that have built it before you. So,
do you have any memorable? This is always a fun question. Do you have any memorable failures as a CEO? Anything you want to share on that?
Man, I got a lot. Well, I think the biggest for me was when we started the business. We essentially we grew in we started doing too many things at one time. So what happened was I would buy these properties, I'd fix them up, and then I would sell them to other investors turnkey. And then the investors would say, hey, this is awesome, but can you manage it for us as well? And I was like, Sure, we'll manage it, right? We were like, we'll do it, right?
Uh,
So we started managing these assets. And then simultaneously, I got my license because somebody said, hey, I can't give you a referral fee unless you're licensed. So
mm,
now here I am doing this development work, which was the lead one that I was doing.
yeah.
Then we moved into this, we were simultaneously building this property management business. And I was having my wife run that business. And I remember thinking, well, that's hers. So that was a mistake, by the way, saying that's hers and not paying attention to it.
Yeah.
And then starting to dabble in this agent business. So I was doing all three of these things simultaneously, but not really well,
I
right?
see.
And so one day we woke up and realized, because I had not been paying attention to one of the businesses, that there was a massive issue in that business that I had to go in, fix. We ended up selling that business. We made money on the sale of that business. But I remember being like, we worked at that business for 5 years and my wife busted her butt on that business for 5 years. And the juice wasn't worth the squeeze at the end of the day. Like we sold it. We made a little bit of money on the sale of that business. And we were like, wow, it wasn't worth it from a financial standpoint. Now, from a knowledge standpoint, irreplaceable. It's what set me up to be able to do,
I see.
Buy the investment assets, right?
I see.
So it's almost like going to college, right? Learning and paying a lot of money for that education, time,
Yeah.
and then being able to use, my knowledge to do something else. So it wasn't until I shut that down, and I stopped doing as much development work and focused more on building an agent practice that helped investors and builders, right, churn property, that we started making a lot more money. So it was the power of focusing on one thing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean you can't set up other divisions. It just means that maybe you're not the one to set up those other divisions. Once you've got that one machine that's operating, it's rock solid, then you could say, okay, let's set up another division and let me find the right who to start that, right? And then hold that person accountable. I was doing all of it. So you can imagine I was stretched, right? Property management, I was getting my hands in there, development, and agent. And we were doing it all. We were working so hard. We were making a decent living. But it was, most people would have burnt out. Like, I think my mentality is like, I was just groomed to be like, work harder. And I was okay with it. But my wife, who was my business partner, was like, listen, I never see you. You work all the time. You're always, and so that my most memorable mistake is doing too many things at one time and it taking away from my family, which we had to correct. I had to fix that. And we fixed it, right? We fixed that, which I'm incredibly proud of, that we fixed that. And
That's great.
Shed a couple of divisions, and then we got better and bigger and badder, right? All in the process. So saying no, right, to things is a very powerful thing as a CEO that you learn over time. Yeah,
I think all CEOs have to be able to relate to that. I'll be surprised if other folks can't relate to it, because I certainly do. One of the ways I've tried to deal with it, sometimes successfully, sometimes not, is I try to think of things as dual purpose. So if there are two reasons to do something, one of them might be money, one of them might be revenue. Like, that's a legitimate reason, but then there's got to be another reason beyond that somewhere, so like and in my business, because I run digital ad campaigns, people are always asking if I can build them a website or if I can design something for them, like a flyer or something that another ad agency that's a full service agency might do. Most of the time, that kind of thing is a mistake for me. Like, it is not a good idea because it's not advertising to build a website. Like, that is, it's related to advertising. But if the only reason to say yes to that kind of request is revenue, then the rule, one of the rules I try to have is that I would say no to that. It's got to be, okay, yes, It has to be, okay, revenue, and it does help with an ad campaign, or yes, and it somehow helps us measure an ad campaign, or something to that effect, where there's always two reasons that remind us why we're doing it, and it supports the rest of the agency. So
and I would even say you don't ever take that on. You partner with
yeah,
somebody that does that extremely well. And there's a great little book called Built to Sell.
yeah.
You ever
I
read
love that
it?
book.
Okay.
You may have even been the one to tell me about it.
Yeah.
But it's yeah. I consider that to be maybe the most important book. If I only had one book for building a services business, it's got to be that one.
It's a
So
great
why
book.
don't you tell us a little bit about it?
Well, first and foremost, it's a story, right? It's a story of an entrepreneur that's struggling, and
Yeah.
he's doing too many things at one time, and he's scared to let go of
Yeah.
any of the revenue pieces, because he sees that if he lets go of one of the revenue pieces, that everything else is going to fall apart, right? But during the course of the story, he learns the thing that he's best at. What's the superpower that he does? And by putting more energy into the
Yeah.
superpower of what he does, like it increases his business like 100-fold, right? And
Yeah.
he's happier, he gets more time back, he makes more money. And it's this whole notion of being able to say no to those things, right? And say yes to just what you're best at. That can set an entrepreneur free, right? I remember reading that book and saying, this book like does such a great job of telling a story. And many times I'll talk to young, entrepreneurs, CEOs, business owners, right? And I'll realize that they're struggling with that piece, and I get them to just read the book. I'm like, hey, I think you should read this book, because it's easy for me to tell them what they need to do, but if they learn it through themselves through a story, then they're like, oh, you can see yourself in the story, and then realize I need to change what I'm doing, right?
Yeah.
So I hope I recommended that book to you. It's a great book.
Yeah, I'm gonna give you credit for it. I don't remember if you did or not, but you may have.
I think I might have, only because
it would have
you're
made sense.
digital. Yeah, it's appropriate for you. So
Yeah, I agree. It would have made a lot of sense. So I have a feeling you probably did. The other thing about that book that is so great is that it really also teaches you that, by working in your business, in some ways you decrease the value of your business. If you're the owner of the business, if you're the CEO and you're doing just about everything, then, maybe you are maximizing revenue in some ways, but you're decreasing value. Your business is not sellable if it depends on you. And so you truly are stealing value and wealth out of the company if every problem that comes up you're solving.
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really interesting way to motivate yourself to not grab every problem to solve, and to let other people grow.
What's really interesting about building a business is I think most people jump into the wanting to build a business because they want control over their time, right?
Yeah.
They want control over their future,
Interesting.
and their paycheck. And yet what happens is that they end up spending, if they don't learn this lesson, they end up spending all the time being the chief bottle wash, cook, waiter, doing all of it, which is the struggle with most self-employed people.
Yeah.
Because and then they spend, so the very thing that they wanted to get back, which was time and control over that, they're spending more time than ever in that business, right? And so they need to ask themselves the question, who can do this job, right? Dan Sullivan just wrote a really good book called Who Not How, probably one of the most profound books I've read in a long time. Okay. And in the book, it's you don't ask yourself the question, how do I fix this, or how do I do this? You ask yourself the question, who can do this? Who's uniquely skilled to do this, right?
Yeah.
And through the power of collaboration, transformation occurs, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what happens is, and I think it's it might be in Will. Okay, so Will wrestled, I wrestled, like you guys probably know that, right? One of the issues that I see sometimes with that mentality is we're used to taking it all on ourselves.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, if it's going to happen, it's because I made it happen, right? But I think that we have to learn that no, you build great teams around you, and
Yeah.
the team makes it happen. The system makes it happen. The people make it happen. The business should not be about you. The business
Yeah.
should be about me. It should be about service standards. It should be about the client experience, and it should be about the team, right? And so I think a great exercise for a business owner is to essentially exit the business, right?
Yeah.
Take a year off, right, and be like, did my business do better or worse, right? Sometimes I think people discover this accidentally, where a medical issue happens or something occurs in their life that forces them to step out. And what happens is then the people around them, if they've selected great people around them, step up and take over the business. And then the business owner goes, wow, this thing operates without me, right? And my wife had that epiphany with her property management business. Her father passed away. And when her father passed away, it consumed, like she went to go take care of her dad, and she had to leave the area, go to Arkansas, like where he was. Or I think it was St. Louis at the time. And Dana and Stephanie ran that business. And Kim came back and discovered, wow, the systems worked and the people worked. And I was just inserting myself in areas where I didn't need to insert myself in.
That's fascinating. That's fascinating. I had on a smaller scale, I think I had a similar thing happen where there was a health issue in my family. I didn't do as much, and not by choice, but I was kind of amazed at how well things went, and this was earlier on, before I'd even really built all the systems that I rely on now. And I hadn't really thought about that, but I think that probably is a real epiphany moment for some people, maybe even accidentally.
You have to have some system. You have to have systems, and you have to have people in place. And then you got to get out of the way and let people lead, right?
Yeah.
The whole purpose is to let others lead.
Let me ask you this. What is the most important metric that you like to look at in your business for measuring success?
In our business, from a profitability standpoint, if I need to look at just one number, it's the number of listings taken, right? Okay. If we're hitting that number, everything else is going to be okay, right? Yeah. That is the number that drives everything else, right? So how many listings are we taking? Now, if I need the reverse engineer to get to that number, it's how many listing appointments are we going on, because that will translate into the number of listings that we're taking, right? So I could go back and say, okay, how many listing appointments have we created in the last week, in the last month? That would be the number. But the number I'm always paying attention to is, okay, we've got a goal for listings taken. Are we on track or off track? Right? The middle of the week, I'm always looking at the appointment number. Are we on track on Wednesday or off track for the number of appointments that we need? And then on the 15th of the month, I'm looking at, are we on track with the number of listings? Are we halfway with the number of listings that we need to take, right, on the 15th of the month? And if we're off track, then we institute what's called the 15th protocol. We do everything we can to get back on track, because that's the number that matters. I see. And there's a lot of other numbers that we could track, but
there's an unlimited number of things that you could track. I mean, that's the problem. So so it sounds like you've really narrowed it down, though. So that's very interesting.
We've obsessed about which numbers make the difference in our business, and it's no surprise. Like this information is already out there. You just have to ask other people that have been doing it a long time, and they'll tell you, hey, that's the number. Great. Then I'll track that number.
Interesting. Yeah. So for me, it's in a lot of ways, it's the Net Promoter Score, which is how many, do your customers want to recommend you to somebody that they know is in need of your services? Somebody could either be positive on that, they want to do it. Somebody could be neutral on that, meaning they like you, but they don't like you maybe enough to recommend you. Or they could be negative. They could say, so there's really just three, -1, 0, or 1. And so the implications of that for me are I want to overinvest in client services. I want to overinvest in hiring people who are experts and who can communicate with clients. And I want to underinvest in salespeople, because salespeople are overrated in my kind of business. It's not, you don't need a salesperson. What you really need is the ability to do such a good job that people are going to refer you out. Yeah. So, and at a certain size, there are certain sales channels and sales folks you might need to bring in and various, there are things you might do on that. But for my type of business, that one, if I boiled it down to one metric, that's the one. And that does drive our company strategy, which is, it's all about expansion through delivery of services. So, I'm a big believer in trying to make sure that you have a real strategy for your business, or that actually makes sense. That is, that's what, that's going to dictate what where you're going to allocate resources. So, meanwhile, for other businesses, it might be a churn and burn kind of strategy where you're just going to try to get, thousands of clients, knowing that you're going to lose hundreds of them. And your growth is going to come from just continually feeding that, that cycle. And it's not at all, it doesn't work in my kind of business, because my clients are really long-term clients.
Yeah. Well, I think that there needs to probably be a combination of the two, but I think in your business, especially if you can generate a lead online or through a referral,
Yeah.
right? I mean, like I think of it, you generate a lead online because somebody saw some piece of content or some video or some ad, right? Then the number of leads that come into your funnel should translate into a number of appointments or
That's
opportunities, right? Those opportunities, a certain number of opportunities translates into a certain amount of engagements, right?
That's right.
And so it's the same thing in our business. The number I know for on or off dictates everything. It's like number of listings taken. That means that there's something else is wrong if we're not taking it, right? Number of leads coming in might be off. The number of calls being made might be off. Right? So, but yeah, you could go back and just say, hey, the number of leads that I have coming into my business could be and I would almost say that it's like that for any business, right?
Yeah.
The number of opportunities coming in.
Yeah.
Right?
So I want to ask, is there anything that you think of as the worst thing about being CEO? Anything you don't like?
I mean, there are times when I'm like, okay, you're carrying a lot of people, a lot of responsibility on your shoulders. And especially during a time like COVID, you know that it doesn't matter if you feel bad. It doesn't, and you just have to step up and lead it. But I don't know if I don't like that. I think that is just part of being a leader, that you've got to step into that, right? Like I enjoy that process. I think I'm wired to want to do that. But there are times where you're like, okay, this is a lot. I got a lot on my shoulders. How am I going to manage the stress involved with all of this? So as the longer I'm doing this, the more I realize stress management for a CEO is really, really, really important, right?
Yeah.
Because everybody's capable of a certain amount of stress, whatever that is. Like maybe my level of taking stress is higher than yours, but at some point I'll reach my capacity and you'll reach yours. And then you have to learn how to manage that to get to the next level, whether it's meditation or yoga or working out. And so I don't think there's anything. I love what I do, right? I like
all those three things. I like yoga, I like meditation, I like working out. I might not do all of them as much as I'd like to, but I do all of them. I actually have incorporated now in over the years, and I fall back on all of them and it really does help with stress and just kind of overall mental health.
You know, what's interesting, when you think about it, if you really build your ideal business, which they talk about this in this book, when you have, then then what you've done is you're really just, as CEO, you're teaching people how to think, and you're a coach and you're a consultant, right? You shouldn't be the one putting out the fires. You shouldn't be
Right.
the one doing all, like, you are the one that essentially have put in the right people in the right seats, and you letting them lead. And all you're doing is asking great questions
Yeah.
and giving them perspective about how to move things forward. And so for me, the journey is, how do I get, and I think the journey of how do I get better at that, right?
Yeah.
How do I continue shedding different roles that do cause me stress? So then you don't need the meditation if you don't want it, right? Because you've got somebody
Yeah.
else. It's like, listen,
Yeah.
it's not me to deal with that. It's somebody else's job to deal with that. Now, that said, as CEO, you're always the one responsible. At the end of the day, the buck falls with you, right? So
That's right.
but I think where people get really stressed out is when they're trying to do too many things.
Yeah.
Have too many people coming to you, too many fires that you're putting out, right? Like then you've built an organization that essentially everybody comes to you because you're the guy that solves all the problems. And really, that shouldn't be the job, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. And I would say I like those three things even beyond the stress management.
Sure.
And that, I agree. Like, I think that, well, the other thing about this whole topic of stress management is, we've all got probably our breaking point, and I think as we go, we kind of understand what that breaking point is better. But we also have our optimal performance threshold where, the right amount of stress will make you bring out your peak performance.
Yeah.
And, and the first, and that's really, I think, where we want to be. Obviously, we want to be performing at the peak level. We want to, be giving the right input, the right advice, and all that. And so, I think that a lot of it is, managing ourselves just to bring out our best.
Yeah, it's interesting. I've never, again, you go back to that book, Built to Sell. I'm just thinking about this, right? The whole purpose of him wanting to go down that journey was so that he could sell his business.
Yeah.
But once he built the business that he loved and he stayed in his superpower, it was like, why would I ever sell this business? Right?
Yeah.
It brings me joy, gives me time, right? I'm surrounded by people that I love. So that becomes the journey. It's like, hey, can I build something that essentially helps me complete my big why? And everybody's big why is different, right? Like, and many entrepreneurs or business owners, CEOs are on that journey to figure out what is it that truly fulfills me, right? And how does this business impact that thing, right?
Yeah.
You've got to connect those two things. At least I believe you have to connect those two things, because our business is so much a part of who we are, right? It's a conduit to magnify whatever it is that you want to kind of deliver to the world, right? So I always look at Richard Branson, who, his core value is business is there to do good, right? And he believes that. He believes that all business is there to do good. And so building a business magnifies that thing for him, which I think is really cool, right? Like I love that.
I love that too. Now, you've given us some great stuff today, and there are 3 books you've recommended. I've gotten the names of 2 of them here, though. So you have Built to Sell, which you and I both love. Who Not How, which is the second one, which I'm going to go out and get. And then I added this third one that you sort of referred to about love languages. Could you give that as a test to, kind of as you're working people through your hiring?
The 5 love languages.
The 5 love languages.
5 love languages. Now, the other one I'll give that I could give you book after book, but Principles by Ray Dalio was another one that I really enjoyed reading. It's a deep book. It's a great book. So many nuggets in his book. I mean, just he's really broken it down and thought about it, and I love how he describes it, right? How he kind of talks about it. So I'll probably read or listen to that book again here this year, right?
Yeah, that's been on my list. I'll have to move that up my list.
Oh, it's an amazing book. It's an amazing book.
All right, so I'm going to put these in the show notes. So we got 4 books here that Rob is recommending, and really appreciate you being on the show. This has been awesome to have you here. Anything else? Anything else you wanna mention as we wrap up? Any projects you're doing you wanna tell about, or anything else that we didn't touch on?
No, man, I'm honored that you asked me to be on here. I think this is a cool little series, right? It'd be great
Yeah,
to kind of get everybody's journey on what it looks like to become a CEO. And there's one thing that's interesting. That one entrepreneur that I told you about,
yeah,
he he ended up selling his company for hundreds of millions of dollars, right? The first one that I worked for. Still very active in the in the business, even though he sold it. Like
yeah,
he loves that. But I remember maybe 15, 16 years later, after I'd been on my own for about 15 years, he said to me something that I thought was really interesting. He said, he's like, I consider myself a CEO now. He's like, I feel like I'm actually a CEO now, right? Now, the interesting thing is, I always saw him as the CEO, right?
yeah,
He was always the chief visionary officer there. He was pushing, he was driving, But it was an interesting comment because along the way, as you're going through this leadership journey, sometimes there's a lot of self-judgment, right? On
yeah.
like, oh, I'm not like, in my mind, he was an amazing leader. But 15 years later, that's when he was like, I think I'm an actual CEO now, right?
That's fascinating. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's fascinating. And I will say, like, I actually did not. My goal was not to be CEO. I wanted to build something. I wanted to foster great relationships. That's essentially what I wanted to do. Was like I wanted to build something that was a positive place for people to create their careers. Like that was much more my motivation. And I feel like I'm growing into, like, I feel more and more like a CEO as I go. But it's interesting because it's not a natural identity for me.
Well, you're more than likely, a visionary. So if you read the book Rocket Fuel, another great book, right? Um, you're probably the visionary there, and that's why on my card it says Chief Visionary Officer. I'd
Mhm.
rather have a CEO running the business. I
Yeah,
want to lead the direction. I want to lead the passion.
that's
I want to
interesting.
lead the people, right? And so in that book, Rocket Fuel, they talk about the visionary and the integrator, right? And the integrator is the person that just gets things done, and the visionary is there, you know, taking the organization in a direction.
I love that.
Yeah, so it's another good one. So
Yeah.
I will leave you with that, my friend. Thank you so much for having me
Thank
on.
you. As always, awesome to talk to you. And this is going to be a great episode.
Sounds great, man. Take care.
Hey, thank you so